they took one day in training to have us sit down and talk about why we're fighting the war. They wanted to find out how we were feeling about this. He looked at me. I wore glasses. He said, "Specs?" I said, "Sir?" He said, "Why are we fighting this war?" And I looked at him. I said, "Sir, we're fighting this war because we don't want to lose all of our rights and privileges as American citizens." In order to do this, I'd have to begin at the beginning. My parents were the people in my life that made it possible for me to be sitting here today. They were born around the turn of the century in South Carolina. Slavery was over, but racism was rampant all over the South, but especially in South Carolina. They had to struggle for food, struggle for a place to stay, struggle for an education. So many things they had to struggle for, because in the society that they were living, they would be continually being told they weren't good enough. So my dad was somebody who always believed that this country had a future. And so when World War I started, he became a soldier. I knew that when I got old enough, I knew that my dad had been in the service. But when he came back, he found that things hadn't changed, so he said, "I'm not going to raise my family here in South Carolina." So he took my mother and my sister, and they migrated north up into Pennsylvania to a place called Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. I told my friends it had to be because 5 more boys were born in Philadelphia. So it had to be a city of brotherly love. Anyway, I was the middle boy, so there were 5 boys. And we grew up there, and our parents never talked about South Carolina, at least in my early days. But then I went off to school, and it was a good school. It was an all-black school. But boy, they were dynamite. Those teachers teach you, oh man, they didn't play. You came on time, you did your homework, you know. And they kept telling you, you can be all you want to be, no matter what it is, but you got to be ready to work for it. And that's what my mom and dad told me, told all of us. I enjoyed the school. They made me aware that I was somebody, I could be somebody, I could do something. I didn't have to be a second-class personality. But nevertheless, those things hit you every day. But then when I got out of high school, I went down to the induction center in Philadelphia. There was a sergeant there, and he stood there and he looked at me. He said, "Go this way." And my friends were there, and he told them, "Go this way." Now that was done because in 1943, all of the armed forces, the entire military, was segregated. I'm beginning to understand things that I didn't understand before, gradually. And here it was. So I was one of 600, a battalion of black soldiers. I was a young man when I got into the military, and they told me I wasn't going to be in infantry. But after we were in infantry for a while, they said, "No, we want you to be combat engineers." So they switched us over. We were in the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion, 600 black soldiers. All the officers were white. We were all sent down into the deep South for our basic training. We went down to Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas. In all of these places, every one of them, the people living there, the people that I had promised to protect and defend with my life, should that be necessary. But I wasn't good enough. I never forgot it. Got on a bus to go in Mississippi. I wanted to go see some girls that I had met at a dance. Bought my ticket, got on the bus, and then looked up and I saw the sign. I'm getting educated. The sign said, "Colored must be seated at the back of the bus." I go to the back of the bus. But when I get back there, I discovered that all the seats back there were taken. And I looked up front, and there were all these seats empty. But I wasn't good enough. I had to stand up for more than 100 miles. I looked at empty seats on the bus that I was not, according to them, but not to me. Inside, I was holding down a great deal of anger. But my parents told me, "Play it right, boy. Take care of yourself. Be respectful to everybody." And so that's what I was trying to do. So I stood up for those 100 miles. But then it came time for my unit to go overseas. We left Camp McCain, went up to Boston, got on a ship, and went across the seas to England. We stayed in England for a few months. We had to get our equipment together. This little town we were living in called Fordingbridge. They were very nice to us. They were glad to see us coming to be a part of the forces that would help protect their country as well as our own. We were there, I don't know, but not a long time because we had rushed to get there. And finally they announced that we were ready to move up. We were leaving this place. And I wondered why we were going so fast. Had to get out and go over. So we got on the ship and went across the English Channel to France. We were told we were in what you call the Battle of the Bulge. And many of us didn't know all about the Battle of the Bulge, but we had an idea. And so they came around and to check us to see if we were ready to go. They gave us our guns, but they didn't give us ammunition. When those people visiting to check to see if we were ready, and they said, "You haven't given ammunition?" They were afraid of us. We were all blacks, 600. They were worried about black soldiers. You heard all these rumors that they wouldn't fight for their country, and they were not capable of doing military procedures. Yeah, these were people from the big man coming down to check on sending us into battle. They got that equipment out in a hurry, gave us all our ammunition, and then we were on our trucks the next night. We left in blackout. We headed up through France. They took one day in training to have us sit down and talk about why we're fighting the war. They wanted to find out how we were feeling about this. And he said, "Specs?" He looked at me. I wore glasses. He said, "Specs?" I said, "Sir?" He said, "Why are we fighting this war?" And I looked at him. I was standing up now. I said, "Sir, we're fighting this war because we don't want to lose all of our rights and privileges as American citizens. And so we're fighting there." I said, "But I'm fighting it back here at home too." And he looked at me because I don't have my rights and privileges back here. So I'm fighting on two fronts. Things got quiet. I never forget that room. All of my friends sat there, didn't say a word. I said, "Leon, you're in trouble." And so he looked at me, and he turned and looked at the rest of them. "Take a break." And he sent them all out. And then he came, called me over, and I looked at him straight in the eye. I had it up to here. I said, "Sir, I'm an American. I live in America, and I'm going to do what Americans do." And I didn't bat an eye. I looked him straight in the eye. Ooh, he began to look like a thermometer. But he went out of that room. He never said a word to me, and all those fellas never. But the war went on. So now here we are. We went to this small town in Belgium called Montelange. It was a very strategic place to be for us. We were combat engineers. And we were told that we had a bridge to build. There was a bridge in Montelange that had been destroyed completely by the enemy, and it was our responsibility to rebuild it. And we had to do this because, you see, further down the road from Montelange, there was another town called Bastogne. They had been surrounded completely by the enemy. Their lives were in jeopardy. They needed support and help right away because that's the only way these supplies and these soldiers and tanks and guns and all of that and ammunition could get across that bridge to get down to Bastogne and to get in there and help the men fight against the enemy. And I was shot at, maybe didn't know who I was, but I was in blackout conditions and late at night trying to get back to where my group was down in where we were having the Battle of the Bulge. I was coming back in that direction, and I couldn't get back, and I had to cross a bridge. And the only way you could get across is somebody had to be on the other side to direct you across. And they came out with their flashlights, the kind for blackout, and they showed me how to get across this bridge that was so narrow. We worked night and day. In spite of the weather, we worked, and it was cold. In spite of the shelling of the enemy, in spite of the kind of bombs that were dropping, In spite of all these things, we worked on the bridge. We worked on that bridge. I imagine it must have been 4 or 5 days, but we worked on that bridge and we finished it. We finished that bridge on time. And all of those supplies, all the men, all the ammunition, whatever they was needed, crossed that bridge. They went down, they got into Bastogne, and they joined up with the soldiers, and they defeated the enemy. What a wonderful feeling to think, for the first time, you've done something, and nobody could say you didn't. So you felt good enough. I'm good enough. I know it. And that's the way I felt. Then we traveled through Germany, and we got aboard the truck. And that's when I said to him, "Sir, where are we going?" He looked at me, he said, "We're going to a concentration camp." I said, "A what?" He said, "A concentration camp." I didn't know anything about concentration camps. In all the training they had given me, no one ever mentioned concentration camp. But on this day in April in 1945, I can never forget it, we were going toward this concentration camp. And I didn't know what I was going to see, but I was anxious to see it. I don't think anyone knew, except maybe a few officers in the camp, because they were not putting out the information about concentration camps. And we went on, and we were now going down into Weimar to a concentration camp. We walked over to the gate, and the gate was open. And I walked through the gate, and there I saw in front of me what I now call the walking dead. I saw human beings that had been beaten, they'd been starved, they'd been tortured, they'd been denied everything that would make life meaningful. There they stood, skin and bone, skeletal faces, deep-set eyes. Some were on the ground, some were leaning against the wall, some were holding on to each other to keep from falling. And they stood there, and I looked at them, and I said, "Oh my God, who are these people? What have they done that was so terrible that would cause anybody to treat them like this?" I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know. But there was a young man. He was young. He probably hadn't been in the camp very long, so he didn't look as though he had been starved or hurt. And he understood and spoke English well. So he began to tell us about Buchenwald. And he said these people were Jews. They were gypsies. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. Some were Catholics. They were trade unionists, communists, homosexuals. He went on with a litany of groups that had been placed in the camp by the Nazis. And I said, "Why did they do this?" And he said, "They said these people weren't good enough. Therefore, they were not fit to live. They could be terminated, murdered." I said, "My God." I couldn't hardly speak. I'd never seen anything like this. I know I'd been mistreated in Georgia and Mississippi. Yes, I knew how they could beat and sometimes kill, even and lynch you. But this, I had never seen all of this. They were not good enough. And so they were just killing them. So I went around the camp. He took me to a barrack where the men would sleep. So I went inside. Oh, it was overcrowded. Oh no, so many people in there, but they were jammed in. And I didn't go very far because I couldn't. You see, the odor, the stench that comes from death and human waste, it was overpowering. I can't stay here. I knew I had to leave. I turned to leave, but before I could move, I looked down, and there on the bottom bunk was a man. He was on a bed of filthy straw and rags, and he was trying so hard to look at me. He was turning his head and trying to lift it up so he could see me. Finally, he did. He worked his head up and he saw me, but he didn't say anything, nor did I. So I turned, I went out the door, and I waited. And I got myself together, and I followed the fellow, and he took me to another building. This was a building where they did what you call medical experiments on human beings, often without anesthesia. And they had straps on them holding them down when they would do this. And when they got this through their surgery. They got the part of the body they wanted to keep. They would take it, put it in a jar of formaldehyde so they could preserve it and put on a label. And I just looked. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I went to another building. In this building, they tortured people. They tortured people. Why? I don't know. Just because they could. They tortured them. I could see the slabs where they would put them. I see the straps that would hold them down. I saw the blood on the cement floor. And I saw those instruments of torture. Some of them were still hanging on the walls. So now I believe. I guess I saw enough to make me know that this is what was going on. And I saw the results of their operations in those jars. You see? The jars that were filled with the parts of the body that they wanted to keep. And they would put them in there in the formaldehyde and put a label on as to what part of the body it was. They did all kinds of experiments, testing things to see what they could find that would help keep their soldiers well and safe. And they would throw people into ice water to see how long they could stand before the body would succumb. It was hard for me in the beginning to believe that any of this could be happening, but now I saw it and I knew it was happening. So I started walking, and I walked through the camp, and I got past the dead and the dying, and I said to the man, "Where are the children?" And he said, "The children are in the camp." I didn't see them. I went through those camps, but I didn't see them. Yet, when we got through the door, leaving this building, I saw the clothing of the little children. Up against the wall, there were mounds of clothing, caps, sweaters, stockings, shoes, all kinds of things for the little children. But I never saw a child. I knew I had to get away from this. I had seen enough. I walked back towards where we had come in, and I walked up to another building. I just couldn't pass it. I looked at it and I could see it was different than the other buildings. There were dead bodies outside. They were stacked up against this wall. And I found out it was the crematorium. This is where they would cremate the bodies of all those people that they didn't want anybody to know about. So I walked over and I saw the dead bodies. I don't think they would leave these things out, especially when they knew we were coming. They were trying to get out of that place in a hurry. People were dying. They made graves. They made them dig graves, and they pushed the bulldozers pushed them all into these graves. I looked at that. I went inside and I saw where they had the bodies. Where they put them into the gas chambers nearby. And people didn't know what they were getting. They thought they were getting a shower or something. But then we would bring them out and they would hang them on hooks. And eventually they had already been stripped of their clothing and everything else they had. So there's nothing more. So they would go in and then the cremation would take place. Now I'd seen enough, so I walked back. But while I waited for my friends, I realized that I was not the same anymore. Something had happened to me. When I was coming into Germany and I was coming wherever I was going, to Weimar, I kept thinking, what am I doing here? What am I fighting for? These people don't care anything about me. All they want me to do is die. So they put me out in harm's way for that. And I was angry. What am I fighting for? But now, I'm not the same. Something had happened to me. And there was nothing I could do about it because I was in the army. These people could do nothing about it because they were captured by the army. But I said to myself, this is not right. If I ever get out of this army, I'm going to try to do something so people can't do this to other people. But I didn't know what to do. I was just 20 years of age. When I got out of that camp and I had to find out more, I wanted to find out the statistics. Buchenwald, the camp that I went into, it was not the only camp. I found out it was other camps replicated all across Europe and into Russia. There were 12 million people slaughtered, murdered. And no one ever asked me when I was going out of the camp, how do you feel, Leon? Nobody said a word about what they saw that day in Buchenwald. So we drove back to our campsite. And we stayed there for a while. We brought the trucks over to move some of them away from the camps to regular hospitals in the field hospitals, because they need it or they would die. So I saw all of these things going on. And then we were told we had to move out and continue our journey deep into Germany, and we did. And it wasn't very long before we heard that the war was over. The Nazis had surrendered. Our president had died. He never saw the end of the war, President Roosevelt. But we knew the war was over. So we went on through the rest of the journey, our journey through Germany. And then after several months had passed, we were told we would slow down a bit. We weren't going much further. We were being told that we're going to have to go to Philippines, because the Philippines were close to Japan, and Japan was still fighting the war. And so the war in eastern part of Europe was over, but the war in Japan was still going on. So we went down on the ship all the way down. We went through the Panama Canal. We were 2 days on the other side when our country dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we thought surely we were going to go home, because we had heard about that bomb. No, we were sent on down, like so many others, to the Philippine area. So we stayed there for 7 months or so, waiting for the culmination and finality of the peace treaty that they were drawing up. Finally, they finished it, and I was ready. So I came home. It was good to get home. What a joy to know I'd come through. I lived through all of that, and I was home. So that's where I was at this time. But I had another phase of my life that I had to go through, and that was, what was I going to do? I'm home. What am I going to do? And then I got my paper. When they gave me my papers, one of them said, "This is the GI Bill of Rights." The GI Bill? Well, okay, so I got to do some reading. And they said they would send you to school, and they would pay for everything. Your tuition, your books, even give you some money to spend every day. I said, this is for me, man. I'm going to go. So I go out to a place in Pennsylvania called Westchester. It's a state teachers college. And I said, I'm going to be a teacher, man. I went to that college, and I got my education. And I sweated through, I worked through, I made some good white friends, because everybody was not evil. Many of them probably were Jewish. It was a diverse school. They didn't buy into that junk that was being promulgated all around the place. But I held on, thank God I held on. And I went through that school. I came out. I didn't harbor any anger for anybody. But I think I let them know when I couldn't teach in Westchester because I was black and the schools wouldn't accept me. The civil rights movement was beginning to come into action. Television was going on. I began to see people. And so there was black people living under apartheid. I mean apartheid. Nothing, have nothing, being told they're nothing, being beaten and cheated, and all the things that take you down, and so nobody to boost you up, except there were some people who did. And I began to put things together. I began to read more. I read books on black history that I didn't read before. The books I got was never anything with blacks, they were all whites. But this was history, and these people made it possible. And how did they do that? Because they rose above the fray. They didn't succumb. They knew they were good enough, and they were teaching me that I was good enough. So I admire my mom and dad to this day, and all the people that have touched my life, because I didn't get here by myself. Oh, I had problems even after the war, even as a soldier going down south. But I also traveled around and I looked. I got involved and got on committees, a part of the Jewish committee that dealing with the lesson on the Holocaust. I worked with them and I learned so much. I had absorbed what I saw in the camp. Yes, ugly, mean, nasty. I didn't want to talk about it either. It was terrible, but back in my mind, it was there. Because of my mom and dad, they lived, not talked, they lived the life of saying, treat other people with respect, no matter who and what they were. And I did that. Was it easy? No, it wasn't easy. And that means that not only just whites, it was blacks that I also deal with who somehow are so angry, they're angry too. And they end up wanting to do something to you. So you got to be careful. Killing, hating, that's not the answer. The answer is love. Not the love in the movies, that phony love, no. It's the real love of seeing that that you're my brother and you're my sister. I'm not going to hate them because the officers didn't care anything about me. I know you can't do that. If you do, then you're just as bad as the others who do it to you.